we're correct. Yeah, it says live. It's good.
Right. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse me.
There's your answer.
We have Hugh Mason.
I sent the brainwave.
Lee, we're ready to go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members and officers. Oh, we've got a few people coming up late. Welcome to Planning Committee today. First of all, let's just, in the interest of safety, if the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room in the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not use the lifts, and please assemble at the Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust fire marshal regulations, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. For those of you who have not attended this committee before, I will explain the running order for this afternoon. After committee members have declared their interest and agreed the minutes of the previous meeting, we'll announce each item and ask those of you who are here to make deputation to come and sit at the table. After the planning officer has made their presentation for the application, the individual deputies will have 6 minutes to express their views, and joint deputies will have 12 minutes between them to make their views known, after which we will take no further part in the proceedings unless we need to ask your question just for clarification. Members will then ask questions, make comments, and the decision on the application will be made. Both members of the committee and members of the public are reminded of the need to consider material planning matters only and not refer to any personal information about other members of the public. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed and filmed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room. It's actually just in the corner there for anyone who wants to know. The camera will be mainly capture the backs of people's heads as they make deputations, but there will be some footage of those who are making deputations as they approach and leave the table. So, you know, and where the microphones are located, and of people entering and leaving the room whilst the meeting is in progress. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those that explicitly state they do not wish to be recorded. Finally, may I ask that when you are making a deputation, and members, can you please use the microphones provided? Right, let's move on. Do we have any apologies for absence? John?
Yes, councillors Gerald Vernon Jackson, who's represented by Councillor Horton, Councillor Galloway, Councillor Gemma New, and Councillor Fleming.
Okay, thank you very much, Joe. I appreciate that. Do you have declarations of members' interests? Councillor Mason.
This is actually a declaration of disinterest, Chairman. You would imply from reading page 26 of the papers in front of you that I had made an objection to 2B Merton Road. You would assume, having read the material on the internet concerning this, that I had withdrawn a deputation. I have done neither. I neither objected nor actually made a request for a deputation. I am rather annoyed to find that people have seen this and have drawn the obvious conclusion that I am an objector. I am not. I merely asked for this to be brought to the Planning Committee because I consider this particular application to be a matter of public interest. Thank you.
On that point, if I may, this isn't the first time this has happened. It's happened a couple of meetings back too, when I brought something to committee and was put down as an objector. And the truth is, when you are bringing something to committee, or you're making a comment, you get put under a lot of pressure to say, are you objecting or are you supporting? There seems to be no room for anything else in the middle. That's quite different from the issue that Councillor Mason has raised, but it is a fact. You know, it's not the first time it's happened, so perhaps we could just get together and straighten that out somehow. Is that all right?
I think it's a fair comment, actually, to be honest. Thanks for raising it, Councillor Mason. Appreciate it. Councillor Pitt, yes, I know you've got a declaration.
I've got a declaration of interest in item 2, and I won't sit on that item.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pitt. Minutes of the previous meeting, are they agreed as follows? Yeah, everyone's happy? Thank you. I'm just going to... Not raised, that is declared. I'm happy with that. I'm just going to slightly move the agenda around because I notice we've got lots of deputies here. So item 4 and 5 I'm going to take at the end, and we're going to move straight on to Leland Road. So can we please have Mrs. Kate Roberts, Mr. Lee Roberts, Mrs. Ruth Harding, Siri Songsbrati, I'm trying to get that right, and Councillor Steve Williams to approach the table, please.
Mr. Roberts, apologies
That's fine, Mr. Roberts. No, thanks. I'll note that down.
6 minutes each.
And we'll move over to the officers.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just start by just explaining this application has a bit of a history to it, which I'm sure a number of members are aware of. It follows it follows a previous application that was refused in 2016 and then went to appeal and was dismissed at appeal last year in 2017. The application was refused for 3 reasons. The previous one, that is, was refused on the grounds of flood risk, so it was felt there wasn't sufficient information to determine that the site would not cause flooding elsewhere or be safe from flood risk. It was refused on the basis of a lack of ecology information and also on the impact of the development on the character of the area. At the appeal itself, the ecology reason was addressed because it was related to bats, and subsequent surveys found no bats, so that issue was addressed before the appeal was started. Then the matters of flood risk and character of the area were considered by the inspector, but the inspector determined the appeal and dismissed it solely on the grounds of the impact on numbers 1 and 3 Central Road, which are the 2 properties directly to the north of the red line on the site you can see on the screen. So this application the current application is a resubmission following that decision. And I'm going to go through a description of the site, the proposal's plans, and then I'm going to do some comparisons with the plans previously submitted. A couple of things just to point out, though. There's some supplementary matters in front of you, which explains some additional information that's received from our flood risk drainage engineer, and also the response that's been made by the applicant to that additional information. This information hasn't changed our recommendation. We're still recommending conditional planning permission, which includes a condition that requires the details of the drainage strategy to be agreed before the development can commence. This includes various details, as you'll see in condition 6, along with a maintenance scheme and verification. So the recommendation remains the same. So in terms of the site, there was a site visit last week, so some members will be more familiar. It's a site that lies in between a number of properties on Leland Road to the east, Central Road to the north, and South Road to the west. It's currently occupied by a single-storey house, which you can see in the top right photograph. It's accessed by a driveway which runs alongside number 46 Leland Road. There's also an existing outbuilding at the rear of that driveway, which is kind of garage workshop building. It's a single story. In terms of the surrounding area, it's mostly 2-story properties on the Leland Road side of the site, and then there's a majority bungalows, single-story dwellings on South Road and Central Road. This is a few photographs taken from the back of the site, looking towards the various surrounding properties. You'll see the boundaries are mostly fenced, although there are some more open boundaries, particularly to the properties on Leland Road. The site is currently quite overgrown because it's been vacant now for some time, so it hasn't been kept or particularly managed. This is the proposed site plan. It's very similar to the scheme that was previously proposed, which, as I said, I'll have got some comparison plans later on. The proposal is to access the site from the driveway next to number 46, which will be widened. I would say that the photograph I showed previously of the access driveway has changed because the garage has since been demolished. So the driveway is already, there is a wider access there. There would be 12 parking spaces laid out on the southern side of the site, and then 3 rows of properties in the middle part of the site, extending to the north, and an additional dwelling in the south-west corner, which would be a coach house style with a flat above 4 parking spaces. All of the properties would be orientated to face south, all the properties on the north side, that is, orientated facing south, and they all have cycle and refuse facilities in front of them and their gardens to the front. The coach house would then have its windows facing to the east. I've now got some elevation plans. So this is the 2 units on the northern side of the site, units 1 and 2, which, as you can see, have a sort of a less width on the first floor level, and this is a specific design to seek to address the concerns of the appeal inspector, which I will explain in more detail in a couple of slides' time. This is the floor plans. Again, you can see the curve, the angled nature of the first floor, which again I will explain is seeking to address the appeal concerns. These are 2-bedroom properties. Then the other 2 rows of properties are designed the same, so units 3 to 6. They're all 2-storey, but with a relatively low, they've got very low roof heights, so there's a maximum of about 6 metres in height. And then, as you can see, the south elevation is where most of all the windows would be, facing south. And the floor plans of these are also 2-bedroom properties. And then the final unit, unit 7, is the one in the southwest corner, which is, as I said, a flat above some undercroft parking, which would face to the east. And the floor plans of these, you can see the parking space underneath and living accommodation above. So in terms of the comparison with the previous scheme, I've got on there's the 2 site plans up there. The one on the left is the current scheme. The one on the right is the previous scheme. The main changes I've written in the middle there is an amendment to the position of units 1 and 2 on the northern side of the site. I apologise because I haven't got my pointer. We haven't got our laser pointer today, but on the northern side of the site, you'll see that the 2 dwellings have been moved away from the northern boundary. They've also been reduced in width. And what that's resulted in is a slight shift in position of all the properties to the south, which very slightly changes their location on the site. The parking layout's also been slightly amended. There's a reduction in 1 space, but that doesn't affect the number of spaces. It still accords with our parking standards, so it's still considered to be acceptable. This is the front elevation of units 1 and 2 as currently proposed on the top of the screen, and as previously, which I've realised there's an error there, that should say previous scheme below. That's how it was before in the refused scheme. And more importantly, I suppose, in terms of the impact on the neighbours, is the rear elevation. So this is the rear elevation on the bottom of the screen, is how it was proposed before, which the inspector described as very sort of boxy, bland, lack of articulation and overbearing to the neighbours. What this amended scheme has sought to do is significantly reduce the width of the upper floor and angle it away so that the bulk, when viewed from the neighbouring properties to the north, is not as significant as would have been with the scheme as shown at the bottom of the screen there. And this is just a couple of photographs taken from the neighbours in question, which we're referring to. So the one on the left is number 1, and then the view from the right is from number 3, which some of the members will have seen at the site visit last week. They have got fairly substantial gardens, but the issue was to do with the visual, the outlook and the sense of enclosure, which this scheme has sought to address. In terms of the other properties, in the inspector's decision, although she didn't determine that the impact on number 42 and 38 was unacceptable, she did note that these would be the other 2 most affected by the development because of the proximity of the new houses. Just the point made here is that the slight change in location of these dwellings means they don't cover quite as much of the rear boundary of these 2 properties, and their height has been slightly reduced as well. And the photos just show the views as currently exist from the back of those 2 properties. And this is just a comparison of the change in design of all of the properties in terms of the amended roof form, which has lowered them slightly. So just to summarise, that's the application has been recommended for conditional permission on the basis that the concern of the planning inspector has been addressed, and you'll see a number of conditions in the recommendation, so it's for conditional permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to Mr. Lee Roberts. Can you just make sure you use the microphone, please?
Good afternoon. I've just got a few comments to read out. Regarding scale, density and traffic, The scale, density and design of this scheme is complete overdevelopment of a small site, far too dense and above the area average. The design statement goes on to say the detailing will be elegant, robust and contemporary, and the all-important beauty when viewing the properties close up is clearly misleading and in fact a real eyesore to the area. The ugly industrial block-looking design is not in keeping with existing properties or materials in the area. The proposal is very overbearing to all neighbouring properties and is built right up to 1 metre away from the garden boundaries of Leland Road, South Road and Central Road. And the west elevation of wall of Unit 6 will be some 5 metres closer to my rear boundary at number 42. For exactly this reason, the development was previously refused at appeal for being harmful to the outlook and living conditions of residents. The planning inspector reported a building of this scale, bulk and height would appear both unneighbourly and overbearing, and a total lack of space between the boundary of the appeal site and the new building would not provide any opportunities for landscaping that could soften or reduce the wall's dominant overbearing appearance. So this new proposal still affects South and Leland Road in the same way. Surely this is double standards. The scale of the site has still not been addressed, still affecting privacy, loss of light and overshadowing. It will be an eyesore from Leland, Central and South Roads, with the loss of the open garden aspect. This proposal will also create an increase in noise, disturbance and traffic, with road safety concerns. Leland Road's a narrow cul-de-sac road already struggling to cope with local traffic and visitors. The additional extra site traffic with visitors will exceed the allocated parking, with the only narrow access being on a bend within Leland Road is also a safety concern for any pedestrians passing the narrow site, entrance and exit. Emergency services access will also be restricted, especially towards the rear of the site with no other means of escape. It's got some photos to show about the flooding. Can I hand these around as well? But I'll read that out. I'll pass these on. There's some dates on the back, so it's quite recent as well. The site is in a recognised high-risk flood zone and has regularly flooded in the past and present, as per the photos show. Currently, the grounds of 46A are mostly garden and acts as a large water catchment and soakaway. The developer intends to raise the lower levels of the garden, which will only worsen the risk to the surrounding gardens and properties. The Environment Agency have already stated the area has a high probability of flooding, and with all proposed sleeping accommodation being on the first floor, the high risk of flooding has clearly been identified. The flood resilient construction of the units does not aid the surrounding properties. Any type of additional construction on this plot would increase the flood risk, and the only means of escape from the site requires travelling further into the flood zone. Comments made by the Environment Agency refer that safe access and egress may not be possible if flooding occurs. The PCC drainage team have commented the FRA site investigations are inaccurate based on misinformation. Recent repairs by Southern Water have not rectified drainage issues, as per photographic evidence taken recently in December 17. The FRA, undertaken 4 years ago, does not acknowledge a history of flooding and fails to address the flood risk to the site area or mitigate risk to surrounding properties. On this basis, the scheme would only increase the risk of flooding. This will place an unacceptable risk and financial burden on existing properties and emergency services. This proposal has been repeatedly submitted since 2014 with minimal change and still has the same amount of proposed units and complete overdevelopment of a small site. The FRA has no definitive answer as to why the area floods. It still poses an increased risk of flooding to all surrounding properties. With this in mind, I would ask who will be accountable if our homes become flooded and uninsurable when this happens. Surely PCC and the LPA have a duty of care to protect its residents from a serious risk of flooding. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Happy to move on to yourself, Ruth.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Ruth Harding. I'm a planning consultant and I represent the applicant I'm going to introduce Siripen Songpreset, who is a senior drainage engineer with Mayor Brown. And Siri is just going to say a couple of words at the end of my deputation just regarding the drainage, the additional drainage comments that have come through since your committee report was written. I will be really brief because, as you know, the issues have been rehearsed in a lot of detail, both during the appeal hearing last year and also the committee report before you, and the planning officer's presentation has been very comprehensive. Obviously, here we are only focusing on two real issues. One being, the main issue being the inspectors' comments and concerns at the time on the impact of the scheme on the residential properties at 1 and 3 Central Road. So that has been the focus of our attention in trying to come up with a scheme that addresses those comments. We did, with this application, submit a comprehensive flood risk assessment that brought together all the information that was collated over the several years since this application or the proposal has been before you, but also additional information regarding groundwater, and that's what Siri will speak to you a little bit about in a minute. So we've been trying really hard to address the concerns of the inspector, recognising that a number of the issues the inspector found to be acceptable, such as the impact on the other neighbouring properties. So the scheme before you, we feel, is much improved and does address all of the concerns of the inspector, and therefore we feel that those concerns have been addressed. So if I could just pass over to Siri just to say a few words about the additional drainage information, please. Thank you.
In terms of surface water drainage for the site, we have looked, as we have worked on the projects for quite a while, so we've got quite an extensive information about infiltration testing, groundwater monitoring, and we have incorporated all the information into our surface water drainage strategy, which we have demonstrated that the surface water drainage strategy will be able to deal with the increased impermeable surface from the development, and so that we will be able to manage and contain all the surface water within the site and discharge to the public sewer at the agreed control rates. In terms of groundwater, we also undertook, we had groundwater monitoring results which indicate that we understand that the site is within the high groundwater table, and hence after the first review of the authority, we have prepared groundwater flood risk management, which identifies all the flood resilient and flood resistant measures that the site could undertake to prevent the site, to prevent the development and also the surrounding area. So I believe that the proposed measures should be able to provide significant protection to the site itself, and also not increasing flood risk in the surrounding area.
Thank you very much. Over to Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, as has been said, this has got a long history, this site, and the applications and the refusals that have followed it. Now, I accept that while people around this table might disagree with the planning inspector's assessment of it not being out of character with the area, you have no choice but to accept the planning inspector's view on that matter. So I will confine my expressions to those areas where there is still, in my view, grounds for conjecture and objection. Clearly, the planning inspector did not move a refusal last time on flooding grounds, but as I understand it from our flooding engineer, our PCC city engineer, that some of the information contained in that submission was wrong. And on that basis, one cannot but question whether the planning inspector might have also refused on other grounds if it had been correct. Clearly, there is also further flood risk research resulting in the supplementary guidance you have before you today. And there is suggested additional conditions. Now, excuse me, while they are welcome, they are conditions to be imposed once conditional permission is granted, and therefore no longer in the public domain and able to be challenged. And that is a concern that I and the local residents in that area have, because clearly there is an existing problem which we believe will be exacerbated by this development. We're told there's a surface water drainage strategy, and it might control the surface water problems for the site, but with the impact of disrupting the subterranean groundwater movement in the area and actually imposing a greater burden on the adjoining properties. Now, other places in the country we've seen this time and again, where buildings have been built on floodplains and the surrounding properties suffer as a consequence. And what I'm suggesting to you, members, is I think there's further evidence now that would allow you to refuse this permission on the grounds of flood risk. But also I would say to you that while I accept the applicant has taken steps to address the impact of the building on the adjoining properties, and it would be foolish of them not to have done so and still come back here with another application, I would still argue that it is insufficient and that it is a matter of subjective judgment whether the steps they have taken are sufficient in the circumstances. And quite clearly the buildings will still have an impact on the adjoining properties, and it is for you to question whether what has been proposed has addressed that sufficiently, and my conjecture to you is that it hasn't. Thank you, Lord Chairman.
Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. I'm happy to open up to the committee for questions. Councillor Lee Hunt.
Well, I don't want to drag this one on, but I think it's going to go on for a bit of time, actually. The first question I wanted is kind of Councillor Weems raises when he says that he understands that there was some other information or information that's put in that was wrong at the appeal stage when we were defending the decision, rather, during the appeal. He says there was information that was wrong. Is that in the report, or is that hearsay? Is it conclusive evidence? Is there reasons to go back to the inspector and say you got it wrong, matey?
What I think Councillor Weems is referring to is that when Harvey, this is our drainage engineer here, reviewed the flood risk assessment submitted with this application, he raised a number of queries, including and considered that a couple of the points made were incorrect. But the drainage engineer consultants did respond to those comments. So there has been liaison back and forth between the applicants and our drainage engineer to resolve inaccuracies within the flood risk assessment.
Really sorry, but what was that discussion about? I mean, what did it focus
To
on?
Harvey. Then.
Good afternoon. I'm Harvey. I'm the drainage guy. So that was specifically about groundwater information, and one of the graphs was actually showing wrong information. It was upside down. It should have been a mirror image when it was actually following, which is a very simple thing to get right.
So the planning inspector looked at the information upside down?
Right, this is the stuff that was submitted with this application.
Okay. Oh, I beg your pardon. Right, I understand now. Thank you.
Councillor Hugh Mason.
think that this does hang on the question of drainage. Looking at the material which has been provided for us today, it is quite clear that with heavy rainfall, you will get a surface water lying over much of this site. Could you advise us on, first of all, the means by which surface water will be removed from this site? Secondly, about the capacity of the Southern Waters drainage system to cope with taking water from this site, because quite clearly there will be a reduced soak away into the site, even if the water table is somewhat lower.
This leads me on to a piece of work that's going on right now. So you don't all have this map, but you can see that's the site there, 46A. The whole of this area within the blue box is a surface water catchment, which means all of these sewers go into one area and they go out through the marshes. That's something we're looking at now with Southern Water and the Environment Agency. We're working together on this. The Environment Agency are involved because there is a tidal interaction. So the water goes out through the marshes. If there's a high tide, the water can't leave, which means it backs up. So we're looking at the whole picture, and it just so happens that this plan application is within that picture. We don't have that information yet, but you'll see in the handout that there are some draft results. But in June we should have some information. What we're looking at is what we can do to stop there being so much water around the area.
Councillor Hunt. Let Councillor Mason do his follow-up.
The first part of my question was, how is surface water being removed from this site and directed into Southern Water's drainage system?
It goes into surface water sewers, and that is exactly what we're modelling, the surface water sewers, to see what the problems are and why we have so much water in this site and other sites within that catchment.
Right. Leaving aside the site itself, can you categorically assure us that heavy rainfall with backing up, there will be no additional flooding on the properties in Leyland Road?
No, sir, I can't say that.
Thank you.
Councillor Hunt, then Councillor Pitt.
Before anyone, just to follow on in that theme, was that evidence about the water going out into the marshes and when the high tide comes, was that evidence given to the planning inspector also?
No, this is new information. They got that information, but this modelling has started since the appeal process last year. So this is all new information. So we're working to try and work out what's happening.
Councillor Pitt.
If we were to grant conditional permission today, what assurances have we got that these properties will not be built unless a solution to this whole problem is found? Because I think that what seems to be coming through from the committee is that none of us have any confidence in saying yes if we think this is going to end up half underwater.
So if I can come in on that, it's the same situation I'm sure that the inspector found himself in, and that inspectors quite often find themselves in when they're dealing with these sort of matters. At the moment, we haven't got that certainty, and in terms of making a planning decision, you should only refuse permission if you don't think you can get that certainty, and it's not something you can deal with by condition. In this circumstance, we feel that the details of how this site is properly drained can be dealt with by way of condition, and therefore we feel confident of making a recommendation this afternoon for approval, subject to that condition being discharged. Now, in terms of what that means, it may be that that condition can't be discharged immediately, because the work Harvey and Southern Water are doing will help inform the discharge of that condition. So it may be, hypothetically, that if a permission were granted today and the applicants came forward to discharge the condition tomorrow, we as a planning authority collectively couldn't discharge that condition because we haven't got sufficient information, and would have to wait for this additional information to come forward before we were in a position to be confident to discharge a solution, whether it's a solution that's before us at the moment, or an amended solution in light of the additional information that will come forward as a result of the larger piece of work Harvey's doing.
Okay, to follow up then, Chair, that makes sense, but I think what I'm getting at is that will that discharge be possible because the applicant in association with PCC can demonstrate that the site can drain effectively, or will it only be able to be discharged if there is clear demonstration that the site and the surrounding areas which currently flood can be drained effectively? Because every application has to be determined on its merits. So what I'm trying to get to is, are the merits of the application in terms of its condition specific to the drainage for the site, or is this about resolving the wider problem, and only when the wider problem's being solved can it even be considered to discharge the condition?
Right, in terms of the application can only not worsen a situation and support the impact of the development that's being proposed. So it wouldn't be reasonable for the applicant to have to solve the whole of the flooding problem in the wider area as a result of this application. What we have to ensure that what's proposed here consumes its own smoke, solves its own problem, and doesn't then impact on an adjoining site. So they couldn't say, yeah, we solved the flooding problem on this site, but all the gardens next door are another metre underwater as a result of it. It has to have no adverse impact on the surrounding area, but what it doesn't have to do is solve the flooding problem for the whole of the area that Harvey's identified.
Councillor Hunt.
So a difficulty with that is that we all know that if you put concrete over ground, the water that hits the roofs and everything, although there will be drainage and everything, is going to not go into the ground, but it's going to go on to less available ground. We see it here in the city south too, with people concreting over their front gardens, which puts more pressure onto the drainage systems. Surely that will happen here, won't it? Because we've got a driveway that's coming up. That's going to go over the cover the open ground. We're going to have foundations put on, which will go onto the open ground, and a whole raft of other things that people might do in their garden, patios and things like that. So, what I'm getting to is surely, inevitably, Mrs. Upton-Brown, it's going to make the situation worse.
What the applicant would have to demonstrate in the discharge condition is the development doesn't make the situation worse, so that they deal with the impact of their own development.
Sorry, he's put in a pipe with holes in it, from what I'm reading here, that goes through the land, and then that discharges the water well, like a sump. Is that right? Soakaway type sump, yeah, but it's a long pipe.
So Harvey might want to
It's in
come in
there,
with
I
more
think,
detail,
yeah.
but what we're saying is we haven't got a solution here
Yeah.
that we're totally satisfied, and therefore we're putting a condition on to allow us to address what the solution is in light of the wider piece of work that Harvey and Southern Water and the Environment Agency are doing.
What about the point of him putting, what's he done then to ameliorate this issue?
Okay, so if you have groundwater, which is water in the ground, it's not in a sewer. If you try and put that in a sewer, you're increasing the risk of the sewer being at capacity when it rains less. So from that perspective, I can't say that the flood risk is being reduced. I can't possibly say that, or that it's staying the same. If anything, it would be more. On top of that, everything we're looking at here, we don't know exactly what the problem is and why there is so much water. So it could be tide locking, it could be the sewage, there could be something wrong with council assets like the roads or the road gullies, or it could be something really simple, but we just don't know, which is exactly why we're looking at it.
But what in the report, Harvey, has he put to try and address that?
Councillor Hunt, can you use your microphone, please?
Harvey, what has he put in the report? What is in the report to address the issue to try and get that groundwater dispersed?
French drains.
To the uninitiated, that is what?
So that's basically, imagine a trench fill up with a pipe with holes in it, like you said, and a bunch of shingle, which will collect water from the ground and take it into a sewer. The problem with that is...
Yeah, sorry, Councillor. And where is that going to be sited?
Around the perimeter of the site.
Okay.
Councillor Pitt, you've been very patient. I'll pass you over now.
Usually am, Councillor Harris. But it's drilling down a little bit more into what Lee's saying, so that was all useful. In terms of the car parking area, is that included extensively within this proposed drainage scheme, is one question. But the second question is, does groundwater that's collected by a French drainage system that you've described drain in a same sort of way as it does on a patch of open ground as much of this site currently is? And if it does, fine, but if it doesn't, what guarantees have we got that what is proposed will work?
Okay, so if the groundwater is going in a pipe and into the sewer system, it won't be in the ground, which is what's happening now. That's increasing the load in the sewers, and therefore there's less accommodation for rain in the sewers. So I can't say that I'm happy with that. Not only that, the groundwater is a very difficult thing to try and quantify. So it doesn't matter what size pipe you've got there, you're still going to have groundwater. And trying to put it in a sewer is something the Southern Water, the water company, actively work against. They don't want groundwater in their sewers at all.
So, just if it's all right to just follow up on that, is it possible that there is an unknown in terms of the existing flooding problem in this area that the French drainage system that's proposed could exacerbate?
Yes, that's possible, yeah, absolutely.
Move on to Councillor Mason.
Page 21, condition 6 is the one which deals with this question of flood risk management. Who in the City Council will have the final say on whether anything which is proposed does meet our standards and our requirements? And the requirements here are quite clearly, as pointed out on reasons 6 and 7 on page 23, does not increase the risk of flooding to the surrounding areas. And so who makes that decision, and at what stage will that be made?
Right, if I can answer that, then in terms of who makes that decision, technically it's the local planning authority, that's delegated authority to me. We work with the technical experts, which would include Harvey, Southern Water, to satisfy ourselves that we've got to a position where we are not allowing development to happen that would not be sustainable development. So the reason for the conditions is that we can actually go back over the strategy together with the additional information to make sure that whatever the solution is, and it might not be the solution that we're discussing this afternoon, is the correct solution to ensure that this development doesn't cause flooding and is satisfactorily drained.
And so if I get that right, it will need the approval of yourself as the local planning authority, Mr. Cable as representing the local leading flood authority, and also of Southern Water as doing the discharge. All three will need to agree that it is a satisfactory solution.
Those are the people that we would consult to satisfy ourselves we can discharge the condition.
Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, you may have another, but so if we wanted that to come back here, we wanted to remove the delegated power to do that. Can we have it back here? It's not that I don't trust the officers one bit, I do, but I would like this decision to be made in the committee, so that gives confidence, more confidence to the people if it goes through. So first of all, can it come back here? Secondly, the gradients. I'd be very interested to know the gradients from east to west, from South Road towards this site, and then from Leland Road towards this site. Is this flat ground, or is there a gradient on it?
if I answer the first bit and then Harvey can come in with the technical answer. In terms of can the condition come back to committee, then there is nothing stopping members from requesting that. It's obviously a technical solution. So, you know, health warning on it. If you want to come in with a different technical solution, then obviously I'll be advising you accordingly at that point. But there's nothing stopping you requesting that the details come back to planning committee.
Ms Harvey, on the, sorry, I don't know the last name, on the, don't want to appear rude, sorry?
Mr. Cable.
Good, thank you. What's the gradients? Is the gradients leaning towards this site or does it go upwards?
Okay, so it goes, so this is the top of the hill. That's the railway, so it does all come this way. Round about when it gets sort of here and all the way out, it's basically flat, but it does come this way. So it will flow this way, but
But on the plans I've got here, there may be more common gradient. Which way is the gradients?
South.
South?
Yeah, it flows south. On the proposal you have in front of you.
If we don't have any other questions, I'm happy to move on to comments. Do you have any comments? Councillor Jonas.
Yeah, I've got one or two things to run past you. The first thing is the concerns of the other councillors worry me, and I'm wondering whether people would agree that until the present problem's solved, I don't think we can agree to any development of this site, because by developing this site certainly won't help the present condition of the flooding, which we can see in the pictures. And we've sat through other planning things and refused things just for being in a floodplain, but here we can actually see floods. The other thing is, we'll come back to the design and the bulk and everything, but the people in South Road, Leyland Road and Central Road will in effect be, instead of looking at one bungalow with an open aspect, be looking at 3 rows of what looks like an industrial estate. Now, if that's not a definite change from what's there, a real big change, and I think we can go back to the planning inspectorate and say this really is an overdevelopment of a place that had one dwelling on it to now it's got 7, or they want 7, and they're not particular. It's only because it's only personal opinion, isn't it? It looks like an industrial estate, but these 3 roads, that's what they're going to be looking at in the morning. But my primary concern is the flooding. I don't see as we can give permission for this to go ahead until the current situation's resolved with Southern Water and the PCC. Thank you.
Just to clarify the position, we obviously have got an inspector's decision. That's a material consideration for you this afternoon, so you don't have the option of going back to the inspector. You have, or the inspectorate, but you have the conclusions that were drawn as a result of the appeal, and the points are quite clear, particularly around the issue of flood risk, which they consider is something that can be reasonably dealt with by way of condition, and therefore that's why we're proposing this afternoon that the outstanding issue is dealt with by that detailed condition that allows a detailed strategy to be agreed via the discharge of that condition.
Just a quick one. Councillor Jonas, can you just clarify if you're
I'm
pushing
coming
for a
back to the
deferral?
fact that we've agreed today that there's more information about the flood plan than we sent to the plan inspector before, and also that he wasn't very impressed with the outlook from Central Road, and I don't think the changes are that much material different to what was proposed in the first place when he said they were sort of had a character overbearing or whatever, although he agreed in principle with it. But then again, he doesn't have to live there, does he? Or she, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Jonas. Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, okay, so look, I've always sought to defend the character and the characteristics of housing in the north of the city as well as the south of the city. I don't believe that's always been the case for people in the south of the city. In my own patch, this committee's pushed through numerous applications cramming in more blocks of flats and houses on the tiniest of sites, not least the one going up in Goldsmith Avenue. And you have to tolerate me on this. Indeed, indeed. So we do see sometimes different standards applied to different parts of the city. and I want to defend the residential amenities of people living in this neighbourhood. It's water everywhere, isn't it? I mean, it's proven beyond any doubt whatsoever. So I find it huge difficulty in voting for it. Having said that, the planning inspector has told us we may not, as far as I can make out, even with additional information, because there are conditions that are put in to resolve those problems, apparently, although I'm not convinced at all, around the flooding. So the flooding issue has already been determined, so far as I can make out, Mrs. Upton-Brown. Is that a fair comment?
That's correct.
Okay. So then we have to move on to how it looks and the impact on numbers 1 and 3. That is a determining issue in the application today, the impact on the people at number 1 and 3, which we were told about by the officer's presentation earlier. I completely agree with Councillor Jonas that there's not been much change whatsoever. It is a pretty awful view, isn't it, for people to suddenly have to see a brick wall, no matter how it's been stepped back. So I've taken into account the stepping back and the changes that have been offered up, but I still don't think it's enough to reduce the impact on 1 and 3, creating that sense of enclosure. So I'm in agreement with Councillor Jonas. If he wants to move a recommendation to refuse, I will do that. But I sincerely don't see how we can do it on the flooding. There are conditions there, and so I'll wait to see what the rest of the committee think. It is very difficult, isn't it?
There's just something I think needs to be minuted because I've realised and it's not related to flood risk or anything like that. The recommendation should say, subject to the receipt of the unilateral undertaking for the SPA mitigation. That was missed off the recommendation report, so I think that just needs to be minuted for whatever decision we make today. Thank you.
Councillor Hugh Mason.
I think that when judging overlooking and closeness of development, we need to view these in context. In the more densely settled parts of southern Portsmouth, a distance of 16, 17 metres, 22 metres would be considered, I think, acceptable. The real question is here, in a much more open development, is this acceptable as a clear distance to prevent overlooking and damage to people's I was thinking of enjoyment of life, but yeah, residential amenities, the same thing. I think it probably isn't, and so on those grounds I would go along with my colleagues in being very sceptical about this development and would be prepared to turn it down.
Councillor Horton.
Sorry, I'm going to go backwards. Can I ask a question, which I didn't think of at the time? I know Claire talked about consultation with various parties. Who makes the decision? I understand what Councillor Hunt is saying about the fact that it's covered with the recommendations from the Regional Planning Inspector, etc. But who makes the decision that the flooding issue is sorted, and therefore if the planning permission was given conditional recommendation to go ahead, that's sorted? I know you said Southern Water, officers, etc. Who makes the final decision?
So what we're saying is we're not certain now what the solution is. We'll put a condition on. The condition will require further discussion. The Harveys would be involved, Southern Water and the Environment Agency, together with the planning officers, and no doubt the applicants, and to confirm that whatever solution we've got is one that works. So we will pull in all the technical support or expertise we need to satisfy ourselves as officers that the solution is the right solution, is a workable solution, and will ensure that this is a satisfactory form of development.
So I'll make the words then. I'll make the words for the refusal, Ms Upton-Brown, that the local planning authority has considered this matter, and that we believe that there is a loss of outlook and the creation of a sensitive enclosure on numbers 1 and 3 Central Road.
Any other comments? We have a proposal, Councillor Mason.
If we're looking at particular places, I would also add 38 Leland Road, because the slight changes, 38 and 36 Leland Road, because the slight changes which have taken place in the alignment of the buildings, I think, bring them back into consideration as areas where there is not sufficient space between new buildings and the existing buildings.
Sorry, do you mean 38 and 42?
No, I mean 38 and 36, where there is 17 metres. Sorry, I mean 38 and 36, because it is 16 and 17 metres.
Over to Councillor Jonas.
And further, if you can add in, and I don't know whether you can, is to say since receiving new information on the flooding, if we could put that in. I mean, it's new information. He didn't have it in his first or her first a check on this, and we've, with our own people, we've got further information on the flooding, and that this, if we give a go ahead, this will certainly not improve the present flooding situation until Southern Water or someone gets their act together.
In terms of a flooding reason for refusal, I'll advise members that there is a clear award of cost if you use flooding as a reason for refusal. The inspector was quite clear in his view that it was something that can be dealt with by condition. As officers, we're sitting here this afternoon again advising you that whilst there are still outstanding issues, it is something that can be dealt with by condition, and you shouldn't be refusing things that can be dealt with by condition. So I would encourage you not to use a flooding reason for refusal.
Councillor Pitt.
We're between a rock and a hard place because it's already been to the inspector. So if we start pushing back on anything the inspector's already given an opinion on, we will just automatically get overturned again. But I think there is scope within what's on the table for further amendments within the opinion that he's already given. Because he did discuss the overbearing nature behind 1 and 3 Central Road. I think is that correct? Can we say that? Okay. It's only been brought back 0.7 from the perimeter. And if you look at the alignment in relation to the properties on South Road and Leland Road, between I've just got crosses on the South Road side, so I don't know what the house numbers are. But the house on South Road that's opposite 38, and again, where we've got 42 and whatever house that is opposite, it's quite clear to me that there is further opportunity, is a word I would use, for an adjustment of the application to mitigate the overbearing impact of the site. So if you look at the gaps between the blocks, one of them's 8 metres, the other one's 8.5, and the one at the back 7. Next to 38 Leland Road, Unit 4, almost 3/4 of the back of 38 Leland Road is covered by that unit, but hardly any of 40. If the alignment was just thought out a bit better, it would be much simpler to mitigate the impact on those properties by moving those blocks slightly so that more of the backs of those properties were not affected. Same on the other side, opposite 38, that's wholly contained within the width of the back garden of that property, whereas if it was moved slightly to the south, not only would that give an opportunity to move block containing 1 and 2 further back from that wall where he said that it is overbearing, it would also mean that the full mitigation was split between the back wall of 2 properties rather than just the one as it is at the moment. Does that make sense? So what I'm saying is that I do think, within the inspector's existing judgment, we have the opportunity to say that whilst the applicant has addressed some of the concerns that were highlighted by the inspector, there is an opportunity for the applicant to go further, and I think this committee's sensible decision will be to defer asking the applicant to take a second look and come back with a slightly adjusted scheme. That gives time for the groundwater survey work to be done, because it's going to be 6-8 weeks away at most. It doesn't cost anybody any money. The applicant waits just a little bit longer, and if they come back and we know what the answer is on the groundwater and they adjust the scheme slightly, we could all potentially be happy. We might not like the design, but the inspector said it is what it is. So we can't do anything about that, but what we can do is ask for a bit more mitigation in the site layout and for us to have confidence in the sewage report.
Thank you for that, Councillor Pitt. Any more comments? So, we had a refusal from Councillor Hunt that hadn't had a seconder, and we've had a deferral proposal from Councillor Pitt. Do we have anyone that's going to second Councillor Hunt's proposal before I can move forward? So, Councillor Jones, you'll second the refusal. Do we have anyone to second Councillor Pitt? Councillor Mason. Right, okay. We'll go for take the refusal first, because that's in the order it came in. So, proposed by Councillor Hunt, seconded by Councillor Jones. All those in favour of refusal, raise your hands. So that's 3. Councillor Pitt for deferral and Councillor Mason seconding. All those in favour for deferral, raise your hands. That is carried. Thank you. Thank you all for coming along. And moving on to the second item, which is 2B Merton Road. Can we just have the deputies come to the front table? We've got Brian Jespeth, is that right? If I'm saying it wrong, please tell me. Jespeth, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to declare an interest and go.
Oh, go on.
I'm acquainted with Mr. Seth, I beg your pardon, and he's acted for me in the past. It's not a current pecuniary interest, so I'll get legal advice on it actually, but I do.
Right, if you think it's a problem.
Yeah, well, I'll get the legal advice first of all.
Yeah, okay.
He did a planning application for me on a former property.
It's a non-pecuniary interest, as you say, and it was a long time ago. But I don't see that it bears any relevance.
I haven't seen him since, to tell the truth. I paid him the money and he pushed off.
It's personally, it's down to your judgment, Councillor Hunt. If you feel that you need to leave the room, we feel you need to stay. It's down to your judgment.
Yeah, I'm going to leave.
Okay.
All right. I hope you don't mind.
No.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm going to have to go.
So I'm guessing Mr. Gary Bird, and I know you, Councillor Symes. I recognise that face anywhere. We're going to move on to the officer's report. Gary.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so this application relates to a two-storey property located to the southern side of Merton Road. Again, sorry, I haven't got the pointer today, so most of you, I know a few of you were on the site visit last week, so located in the heart of Southsea, Owen's Southsea Conservation Area, St Jude's Church just to the left of the picture, and Marmion Road running east-west at the bottom of the screen. As I said, the site is located within the Owen's Southsea Conservation Area. Within the area, you can see a number of properties that are entered on the City Council's local list of buildings of important architectural interest, and the boundary walls you can see marked in red. Also within the area, there are a number of later infill developments, notably the application site, which was built in the 1950s with the two adjoining properties. There's also some modern blocks of flats on the northern side of the road, and also a pair of semi-detached 1950s properties opposite as well. So planning permission is sought for the demolition of this 1950s dwelling house, marked with the X. You can see top of the screen, and then on the left-hand side, the view from Merton Road with number 4 Merton Road in the foreground, and then at the bottom right-hand of the screen with number 2A in the foreground. The proposal is for the demolition of the existing dwelling, its garage, and the removal of a tree protected by tree preservation order, and for the construction of a new 3-storey dwelling house. The key issues for determination are design, impact on heritage assets, the loss of the protected tree, and the impact on the amenity of adjoining occupiers. So as I say, the post-war dwelling, it does not necessarily reflect the qualities of the typical Owen design and the Owen style properties within the surrounding area. However, it does display some architectural merit and is of a decent standard. However, this is not in itself considered to be a reason to retain the existing property, and as such, the principle of its removal and its replacement by another building of a suitable scale and design is considered to be acceptable in principle. This is the view on the left-hand side of the side elevation of the property and the view across the front garden of number 4 Merton Road, and the west elevation of the property, which is largely obscured by the presence of number 2A Merton Road. The proposal is for replacement with a dwelling with a very modern appearance. It doesn't seek to replicate the typical Victorian Gothic Owen style of the surrounding area or the 1950s style of the building it replaces. The building would be wider, set in approximately 1.8 metres from each boundary, which would result in the removal of the protected tree, which you can just see on the left-hand side of the screen, the circle about halfway along the building. Although deeper at ground floor, the building would maintain the existing north and south building lines of the existing dwelling at upper floor levels. The dwelling would comprise 4 storeys. I did describe it as a 3-storey building earlier. There's 3 storeys above ground floor level. There is 1 floor of basement, which is contained entirely below ground floor level. Each of the floors would then reduce in scale as you move up the building. I've tried to put the floors in alignment of how they would stack up. It's quite difficult to understand because they don't sit, and hopefully the sections should give you an idea that they are staggered and there are some overhangs between each floors, giving the building some more interest. You can just see the outline on this one. I'm going to point it out. Just in here. The blue dashed line at the top of the screen there is the top of the chimney of the existing dwelling, and you can see just emerging on the right-hand side the roof line of the existing dwelling. This is the street scene from within Merton Road at the top. Just onto the the right-hand side of the building is number 2A Merton Road. The larger building on the left-hand side is number 4 Merton Road. The building that you can see sat in between the two isn't actually in the same plane as these 2 dwellings, but is actually a property that is sat to the rear of the site within Wilton Place. In order to demonstrate the quality of the proposed dwelling, the applicant has provided a series of detailed drawings of the key architectural details and materials. This includes the overhang of the first floor, both from the side elevations and at the front, which you can see the section on the left-hand side of the screen, it replicates there. The large narrow framed windows and the ribbed timber cladding and curved corners to the first and second floors. And again, you have a plan that lines up with the roof to give an indication of how the building is curved at roof level, and you can just make out the timber ribs, giving the building more texture. The materials are again modern and quality and appearance. Just an example of the bricks that are being suggested, the Roman style bricks, which are the longer, narrower bricks, give a more contemporary appearance, and have also included what the applicants provide as a brief 3D model, giving an indication of how the building steps and overhangs at different levels. Overall, it is considered that the dwelling is of a sufficiently high standard to be appropriate for its siting within a conservation area. Now, whilst the design is modern, the dwelling would retain some of the typical Owen characteristics of the surrounding area, which includes a significant setback from the road, maintaining that spacious quality of a conservation area, and is effectively for a large villa-style dwelling in an area that is typified by the large Owen-style villas of the period, and actually potentially more characteristic than the 1950s dwelling it replaces. Sorry, just go back. Now, whilst the building is larger and bulkier, and it would change the appearance of the street scene, this does not necessarily result in harm, and it's considered that overall the proposal would preserve the character and appearance of the wider conservation area. In terms of the removal of the tree, the proposal would result in the loss of a protected lime marked with the X, and you'll note that it is sited back from the street scene behind two other trees. The applicant has provided a consultant's report which highlights that the tree is located in very close proximity to the boundary and the neighbouring garage. It has a poor form at canopy level for the way it's been pollarded in the past, and includes a large decayed cavity at ground floor level. The City Council's Arboricultural Officer has considered this report, and whilst it appears that the tree is currently healthy and vigorous, it is agreed with the conclusions presented by the applicant that the dysfunction at the stem level would preclude the prolonged retention of this particular tree. Therefore, the recommendations to remove the tree, which is sited behind the healthier specimens on Merton Road, and its replacement within the front garden, providing greater amenity of value into the future, is considered appropriate for this particular site. In terms of residential amenity, the greatest impacts will be on the two immediately adjoining properties to the east and west. This looks at the relationship with number 2A and 2B Merton Road. You can just see 2A is the middle of the two properties, which incorporates a large outbuilding along the boundary with the application site, which members you would have noted on site last week. Now, having regard to the presence of this existing outbuilding to the rear of 2A Merton Road, and on the basis that the new dwelling would not project significantly beyond the building line of the existing dwelling at upper floor levels, it's considered that the proposal would not result in significant harm to the amenity of the occupiers to the west. To the east, the building would be approximately 3.6 metres closer than the existing dwelling, and with the loss of the lime tree on the boundary, which you can just see at the bottom of the screen. These pictures are taken from the side windows of number 4 Merton Road, at first floor level in the bottom left-hand corner, second floor level at the top right corner, and from within the rear garden of number 4 Merton Road in the top left-hand corner. The increased proximity of the building and its increased scale and bulk would certainly be perceptible to the occupiers of number 4 Merton Road. However, having regard to the degree of separation provided by the outbuilding, which gives a degree of separation of approximately 8.8 metres between the two flank elevations, it's considered that the proposal would not be significantly harmful in terms of its impact, in terms of loss of light, loss of outlook, or increased sense of enclosure. Members, you have a detailed report in front of you, and for the reasons set out, the application comes with a recommendation of conditional permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gary. Just move on to the deputations. Do you want to go first?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have been asked to speak on behalf of my neighbours, all of whom object very strongly to the application at this above site. Mr. and Mrs. David Smith live at 1A Merton Road opposite the site. Mrs. Rosemary Fry, who lives at number 3 Ormsby Road, lives diagonally opposite. Mr. Richard Trist lives at number 4 Moton Road in his house, adjoins the property. My wife and I live at number 6, which is next door. Our objections relate primarily to the design of the proposed dwelling. Your council has produced a document for Owen's South Sea Conservation Area entitled Guidelines for Conservation. It states in section 6, the problems, page 15, and I quote, "A variety of factors have combined to erode the special character of this conservation area, ranging from major to very minor changes. However, the effect has been cumulative, leading to a gradual decline in the area's distinctive character due to the loss of the original buildings and the use of unsympathetic materials and alterations to buildings." It goes on to state that the importance of this area rests on its relative completeness as a Victorian suburb. To safeguard this completeness, the more marginal part of the area, in particular, must have the benefit of careful control and enhancement. That's your advice. Now, I am a town planning consultant, and in that role, my practice advises on heritage matters. And I recall a meeting with a senior representative of English heritage when advising on a listed building. The architect developing the site had produced a design that took many features of the existing building. This was rejected. It was made clear by English heritage it doesn't approve of pastiches, although most members of the public do. The advice was to provide a design that could not be confused with a historic building. A modern dwelling in traditional materials was favoured that was subservient to the listed building. Applying this principle to the conservation area, the proposed design fails to be subservient and fails to use traditional materials. The committee report makes clear that this was not the intention. It refers specifically to references to Le Corbusier and Alva Aalto. These architects are Mimite even within their own profession. Le Corbusier's individual houses are described as functional and ascetic in appearance, with geometric forms and bare facades. Some of his work is described as brutal and austere. The work of Alvo Aalto is renowned for its functionality without historical stylistic references. These are the very reasons why the design is wrong for this site. I do not object to the design, but it is the wrong solution for a Victorian suburb. The committee's report states the proposed dwelling would result in significant additional bulk at the site, and the acceptability stroke suitability of the design is subjective and will divide opinion. Pages 44, 43 and 44 of the report. Well, as a matter of fact, we are not divided. We are all entirely opposed to the proposal. The report also suggests that the proposal could be considered in isolation. This is another reason why it is wrong for a conservation area. The site of the proposed house is in a transitional position. On one side is the 1860s Bowden House, and on the other, two 1950s dwellings of admittedly undistinguished character. What advice would be given if a proposal for the redevelopment of one of these houses was proposed? Would another house of the same design, referencing Le Corbusier and Alvo Aalto, be essential? This would clearly dramatically alter the character of the area, but what else could you put forward? Contrary to the suggestion that the palette of materials is appropriate, I believe it is insensitive. The palette proposes render at ground floor and timber at the second floor. These are the very materials that the Conservation Area Guidelines discourages on pages 16 to 26. The English Heritage Guidance, entitled Conservation principles states that the long-term consequences of proposals should be benign, and the design should not prejudice alternative solutions in the future. It is evident that the proposal fails this guidance. It has lateral prominence at odds with the character of the conservation area. The conservation area document has a section 7 entitled Guidance, which cover a range of development scenarios. In respect of extensions, it says they should not overpower the original buildings in terms of design and materials. In this section, it states that the City Council will encourage the use of traditional roofing materials.
Excuse me, Mr. You've got had 6 minutes. Can you get you to sum up, please?
Thank you. I just conclude then that the proposal fails to preserve and enhance the conservation area. The design is contrary to the conservation area guide. It should be refused permission. The applicant should consider an alternative proposal. You should follow your own advice in your conservation document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very detailed. Very detailed. I like it. Mr. Gary Bird.
Thank you. I have some items to give out, if that's possible. Good afternoon. We are the applicants, Gary and Sarah Bird. Welcome the opportunity to speak to the committee regarding this application, which represents a proposed new family home for ourselves and our 2 daughters. This is not a commercial development. As long-standing residents of Central Southsea, we are well aware of its history and character and fully supportive of the aim of preserving and enhancing the conservation area in which we currently reside and hope to remain. Therefore, together with our architect, we have worked closely with the Council's designated planning officer and conservation officer to achieve a design which we all believe enhances the area by replacing the existing rather nondescript property with a stylish contemporary design, which will be built to a high specification using top quality materials and the latest construction methods. The current designs evolved from previous versions, taking full account of the objections and concerns raised by neighbours and the advice and guidance provided by the council officers. Consequently, an entirely new design was created and submitted. The key changes to the previous scheme being a reduction in the height and depth of the proposed building, removal of balconies, and overall a softer, more restrained design. Of the overall volume of the property, 35% is now below ground level, 52% over ground and first floor levels, and only 13% on the second floor level. The increase from the existing ridge height of 8.6 metres is now only 70 centimetres, giving an overall height of 9.3 metres, which is 1.7 metres lower than its neighbour number 4. A landscaping scheme will be implemented, including the planting of the new tree to the front parking area, which will enable the completed house to blend into the street scene. Having now reached a point in the planning process where we have satisfied the requirements of the planning department, we are naturally disappointed not to have gained the support of all of our immediate neighbours in this application. A common theme expressed in their submissions is that the design is not in keeping, does not fit in, or is out of character to the conservation area. Whilst we entirely respect the rights of any objectors to submit their views, such comments are of course simply an expression of personal taste and opinion. We are encouraged that only 4 submissions have been received from the many hundreds of residents and other users of Merton Road who have also been invited to comment. We are required to respect the planning process and to respond to the valid concerns raised to the satisfaction of the planning department, which evidently we have done, resulting in the recommendation for conditional permission to be granted. However, it is simply not possible, neither is it a planning requirement, to satisfy all personal tastes and preferences by compromising our own. If I can now refer you to the handout which I gave you earlier. These are examples of contemporary architecture, all within other parts of Owen Southsea conservation area. Some may consider these more challenging designs than our own proposal, in that they're either much larger developments or adjacent to the Thomas Owen built Grade 2 listed buildings, whereas in the case of figures 4, 5 and 6, both. 4, 5 and 6, 4 and 3 is Admiral Square. If you're not familiar, it's a couple of 100 metres from the proposed site. All of these buildings have been successful in fulfilling their intended purpose and have now become integral parts of the street scene without any discernible adverse impact on the conservation area as a whole. In the case of our own application, not only will this scheme have no detrimental impact, it will positively enhance the conservation area, as we are simply proposing to replace the existing mediocre, low-standard property with a much superior replacement. The new house will achieve this by firstly being superior to the existing property in terms of design and building standards, quality of finish and amenity value to both the public and its occupants, providing additional off-road parking with a turning area to enable vehicles to leave more easily front first, and being more energy efficient, producing lower emissions than the existing property, and by preserving the original front wall, replacing the diseased tree with a new tree to the front garden, again with greater amenity value to others. In conclusion, I'd just like to add that the proposed house does not attempt to replicate or imitate any of the nearby Victorian architecture. We believe that our scheme maintains the spirit and purpose of Owen's vision of this part of Southsea in providing an individually designed and built quality family residence of generous proportions, set back from the road, behind trees and wall. Therefore, we ask the committee to support our application. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Bird. Much appreciated. Over to you, Councillor Symes. You've got 6 minutes. Your microphone's not working. They must have known you were coming. Yeah, that's it. Over to you, Councillor Symes.
Maybe that's what was wrong with that one. Yeah, I'd just like to... I'm here today to object to this application. I don't think it either complements the modern properties on the one side, nor the Owens house on the left. I know we all have to look at things on their own merit, and I'm sure we'd look back over the last 60 years, and there are some buildings that we wouldn't even consider erecting today. And I don't think we should continue on that road. No one wants a pastiche, I quite agree, but you need something that actually sits comfortably within the space. If you look along Clarence Parade, there's a building where the old Parade Hotel used to be, called the Parade Apartments. Now, this building sits comfortably within all the other properties along that road. It doesn't shout at you. This building shouts at you. I believe that modern buildings do have their place, but this isn't the place. You know, I think that we have to be very careful about what we do, because future generations have to live with our mistakes, and the mistakes along Clarence Parade and in some of the other roads are just awful now. We look at them and think, God, we would never have built that. I think this is overbearing. I think it's over-dominant. I think it would have an adverse impact on the residential amenities and affect the setting of the conservation area. So I do hope you'll agree with me and refuse this application.
Thank you, Councillor Symes. Could you just turn your microphone off? Thank you. Okay, members, over to you for comments. No, questions. I'm right, questions. I'm getting confused. That's of my age. Any questions? I'll go for Councillor Jonas. He just got there first.
Chairman, is the proposed building bigger than its next door neighbour?
Oh, I'll pass that over to Gary.
The original Owen style property, number 4, or the 1950s property? No, it's not larger. In terms of floor area, I couldn't tell you, but in terms of footprint, it is smaller. Let me see if I've got a... So you can see this is number 4. This is the application site. So the building will effectively sit in this area here, and the ground floor, it will extend only the ground floor to about that position there.
Can you just reiterate that for us on the microphone, Gary, so anyone that's
Sorry.
watching can hear?
Yeah, so the larger property to the right of the screen is number 4 Merton Road, which is the original Owen-style property. The application site with the red roof. The footprint is effectively the same as it is at the moment, although with the removal of the lime tree to the right of it, it will extend further across towards the boundary with number 4. And then at ground floor only, there will be a single-storey extension to the existing footprint. So looking at that, I would say it would have a smaller footprint than the Owen-style property to the east of it.
Okay, Councillor Hugh Mason.
I would like you to comment on the building materials which are proposed for this this building. Quite clearly, they are different from both the neighbouring buildings 2A and 2, but also very different from the red brick style of the conservation area. Do you consider, and why do you consider, if you do, that the building materials which are used here will complement those of the rest of the Owens conservation area?
Okay, you mentioned the typical red brick of the conservation area. I think there are a number of red brick properties in there, and the typical material of the Owens design was red brick. However, there are a number of building materials within the surrounding area. Certainly, just from this zoomed-in image, you can see there's a large quantity of stucco, render for those that want to refer to it in other terms, on a number of the Owens buildings. The existing property at the site is quite a yellow brick. The boundary wall appears to be older and is more of a buff and a toned down buff brick. The Admiralty, is it Admiralty Court? The Admiral Square, just off of the screen here, is also just at the top of the screen there is a very yellow, hard engineering brick almost. And then you move further to the east and you have larger blocks of flats. So within the area, you refer to there being a typical red brick. I think that has been eroded quite significantly by a mix of materials, stucco, red brick, yellow bricks, buff bricks. And as I said within the report, this building isn't seeking to replicate what's in the area. It is using high quality materials, which is a characteristic of the Owen South Sea. And I take the point that when extending buildings or adding to them in some way, that we should be seeking to use matching materials. This is a new building that replaces a non-original building on the site, which is why we consider that using a high quality, and through the conditions that we suggested, we will be seeking to agree the finer detail of those materials in terms of the colour. So we know roughly what the shapes and the textures will be, but agreeing a suitably buff or yellow brick to match in with the boundary wall that will be retained, we consider that there's an appropriate palette of materials that represents a high quality development.
Any more? Oh, over to you, Councillor Jonas.
Could the arboricultural officer confirm that there's enough room in the front of the building to put a new tree in if we agree and the old lime trees are chopped down? Thank you.
He can indeed, Councillor. Subject to the removal of the existing hard landscaping, the front is pretty much all concrete at the moment and paved. Once that's removed, a correctly engineered and constructed tree planting pit can be created, and then with the appropriate method of surfacing, the car parking can be reinstated, but in such a manner that it won't be interfered with or will not interfere with the root area of the tree, and will allow a tree to establish and develop quite successfully. Probably better than the existing trees that are already on the site.
Any more questions before we move on to comments? No questions? On to comments. Any comments? Anyone? Councillor Mason.
I must admit I'm torn on this. I like the design. I think it is a very interesting building. The real question is, how well will it fit into this area? Is it suitable? Will it, in the words of what we are required to consider, will it enhance the conservation area? And again, this is quite difficult for the simple reason you had Admiral Square, which is very close and is again a very modern design. You won't recall, but some other people will, that I think it was the Admiral Square is the third iteration before it was acceptable. The first two were for that area.
I think that was a bit before my time, Councillor Mason, if I'm honest.
Yes, I think it probably was. It wasn't before my time, however. I've dealt with that one. But it is a question of enhancing and maintaining the conservation area. And on balance, I would say that it does not. I don't think it's a good design. It's a very interesting design. But I do not think that this will enhance the conservation area because, A, of the quality of the design, and 2, the materials. And so I will propose rejection.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Do we have any other questions at all? No questions, comments? I've done that twice today. Any more comments? Anyone happy to second Councillor Mason's proposal? No? I think you're on your own. Yeah. Personally, I actually like the design of the building. I'm very much the same as yourself. I think it's a great building. You made a very good point with Admiral Square, and the handouts are quite self-explanatory about the buildings that are in the area that have been built. So I'm also torn on this one. So I'm waiting to look at the members and see where we're going to go. From a personal point of view, I would be minded to accept the application, but also at the same time, I'm not too sure. I'd like to hear what everyone else says.
If you're going to make a proposition,
I'm tempted.
You do not need a seconder because you're chairman.
I know, Councillor Mason. I'm waiting to hear what the any members of the committee have got to say. Councillor Brent.
Like yourself, I'm actually struggling because I do like the design of it, and I did go down to the site visit. I am really struggling.
That's it. I didn't do the site visit, but I'm familiar because I know a couple of pubs around the area, so I know exactly where it is. Wow, no, it wasn't me, Councillor.
It is a tricky one because we're being asked to say whether it enhances the area, and my opinion is that it neither enhances or detracts from the area, because if you've got 1950s style houses there, opposite you've got a great big block of apartments, I believe they're now called, and just along from that you've got another, I don't know if they're listed in this conservancy, you know, it is difficult. Then you say, should we replace poor with, you know, not poor, but not the same. I think the design's good. I like the idea that they're digging below ground. I should wonder when they reach water. It's a very high water table in the area. It is a tricky one. On the previous one I was arguing about the flooding, and I might be encouraging an underground swimming pool if I vote for this, so it is tricky.
Councillor Hawson.
I'm going to agree with everyone else that it is a tricky one, but after going backwards and forwards on it, I think I would recommend approval for the simple reason that there are so many. When we went down for the site visit, when you scan round, if there'd been a uniformity to all of the to the buildings, I think I would, even though I really like it, and I appreciate the whole thing around context. So many times we argue things about context. And if all of the other buildings had been of that kind of traditional villa style, I think I would not go for approval. But I think partly what's swaying me is the materials. If the materials are of, if this picture is a realistic representation, then when I scan that and I go down that road, I think it actually blends in, and with the tree as well. So I think, having taken on board all of those thoughts, and it is a knife edge thing, so I can see both sides, but I would go for approval.
So we have one on the table for approval, one on the table for rejection. I'm looking for a seconder for Councillor Mason. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Mason? Do we have a seconder for Councillor Horton? Councillor Brent's going to second Councillor Horton. Right, okay. We'll go to the vote for approval. So Councillor Horton proposed, second by Councillor Brent. All those in favour? All those against? No, any abstentions? I really couldn't, to be honest, I really couldn't decide. So that one's been approved. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Pitt, is your ward colleague coming back? Oh, okay. He's did he realise that we had a couple of items left? Yeah, I imagine. Okay, well, no, I generally know what he's like. He wouldn't have gone without saying so.
I would have held him hostage, but I was eating a sandwich.
No, I don't blame you. Going to go back on to item 4. So any planning appeal decisions concluded up till April 2018. So I'm going to pass you over to Claire now for this one.
Okay. Members, you've got a report which gives a list of all the recent appeal decisions. There's obviously a number of recent ones relating to HMOs. We've detailed the inspector's considerations of the HMO amended SPD in a number of the considerations. Some of the earlier appeals were appeals against non-determination, so that was in the period before we amended the SPD. I think it's a detailed report, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Over to the committee. Actually, before you start, Claire, I just want to ask this question. This is very much up until the SPD's come in. We've got a lot for non-determination. Have we got anything in here that has happened when the SPD's in full force? Because at the moment, it seems to be, when I'm reading it, it's already HMOs that are already, what I would say, already have the usage, and yet they just want to become between C3 and, well, sui generis, shall I say. That's what it seems like. So the SPD, in my opinion, hasn't been challenged as it should.
Yeah, there's a number of the appeal decisions that were applications that effectively were in the pipeline whilst we were looking at the SPD and in consultation. So we referenced them to the inspector, but the SPD hadn't been fully adopted.
Over to you, Councillor Pitt.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. I'm just wondering, Claire, if we've got any appeals that are pending that are after that point.
We will have pending appeals that are post the amended SPD, but we haven't had any decisions on those yet.
Okay, thanks.
Is there any more questions on that item? Oh, okay. Everyone's happy with that. I'm just happy to move on. Going on to item 5, an update from the City Development Manager. Who's next to me?
Members, I haven't got any updates for you this afternoon.
That concludes today's meeting, everyone, and you can all go back out leafleting.
you engineered this so that these meetings are shorter? Because something's distinctly happened.
I couldn't possibly comment why the meetings are shorter.